The Supreme Court had never seen anything like this. In a chamber built for centuries of tradition and silence, one young congresswoman dared to speak up, and the world watched in shock. Justice Clarence Thomas, one of the most powerful men in America, was blindsided by Representative Jasmine Crockett, a fearless lawyer-turned-lawmaker who refused to be intimidated. What happened next would ignite political firestorms, dominate headlines, and challenge the very idea of respect, power, and accountability in the highest court of the land. Stay tuned, because this is the confrontation everyone's talking about. And it's only the beginning. The marble floors of the Supreme Court gleamed under the soft, diffused light filtering through the towering windows, the silence hanging like a tangible weight, broken only by the faint shuffle of papers and whisper of footsteps. Justice Clarence Thomas, his black robes heavy with the authority of decades, sat motionless behind the imposing bench, eyes scanning the room with a quiet intensity that had become his trademark. Today, the chamber, steeped in centuries of tradition and decorum, would witness an extraordinary moment. Young Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas, a bold and fearless figure carrying the weight of her legal career and the hopes of a generation demanding accountability, would step into these hallowed halls. Every eye followed her measured steps, every breath she took charged with significance, as she prepared to confront the embodiment of judicial conservatism. Thomas, whose tenure since 1991 had been marked by unwavering commitment to originalism, sharp legal reasoning, and controversial moments, from his contentious confirmation hearings to whispers of ethics scandals that lingered like shadows. Known for his silence and surgical precision in court, Thomas had grown increasingly combative in recent years, hardened by isolation, scrutiny, and perceived attacks, defending the court's sacred history and strict protocols with an unyielding sense of hierarchy. Yet, even his formidable presence and rigid adherence to tradition were about to meet their greatest challenge in Crockett, whose courage and principled stance promised to shake the marble foundations of the Supreme Court, blurring the lines between law and politics, respect and defiance, in a confrontation that would leave the nation watching history unfold. Representative Jasmine Crockett stood as the antithesis of everything Justice Thomas embodied. At 43, she carried the energy of a new generation determined to challenge entrenched power. A former civil rights attorney from Dallas who had fought tirelessly for justice long before entering Congress in 2022. Her sharp legal mind, fearless questioning, and refusal to be intimidated by seniority or title quickly earned her a reputation as a formidable force. Crockett's journey had been forged through resilience. Growing up in St. Louis, working her way through law school while navigating a society that often underestimated her, and dedicating years to criminal justice reform for those whose voices had been silenced. In Congress, she challenged senior members, exposed hypocrisy, and leveraged modern tools like social media to connect directly with constituents, believing that institutions should serve the people, not the other way around. As she entered the Supreme Court, the ornate marble halls, solemn portraits, and echoes of past justices reminded her of the barriers broken and voices silenced over centuries. That day's hearing, Henderson v. State of Georgia, wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a battleground for American democracy, questioning whether state laws disproportionately suppressed minority voters. For Thomas, the case was about defending the pillars of federalism and originalism, viewing the Constitution as a framework that demanded respect above emotion or partisan urgency. For Crockett, it was about real people losing the fundamental right to vote, each statute a barrier preventing full participation in democracy, making her mission not merely legal but moral. The clash of philosophies, centuries of tradition against the unstoppable force of modern accountability, was palpable. In the echoing chamber, every gaze, every whisper, every movement carried the weight of history, and both Thomas and Crockett understood that this confrontation would be remembered not just for the law argued, but for the collision between entrenched authority and the rising demand for justice and fairness. Representative Jasmine Crockett stood as the antithesis of everything justice and measured discourse had become an arena. She carried the energy of a new generation determined to challenge entrenched power, began asking former civil rights attorney from Dallas about federal oversight of state election laws before entering Congress more than legal inquiry. Her sharp and unmistakable edge, fearless questioning, a challenge aimed squarely and refusal to be intimidated by seniority Representative or Jasmine title Crockett quickly earned her reputation as a immediately grasped the subtext. Crockett's journey every had been forged through resilience. Every inflection was a test of authority. St. Louis, subtle political barbs aimed at her and her colleagues, navigating a society even that often underestimated her, uncomfortably and dedicating years to criminal justice Roberts intervened several times to redirect the discussion toward procedure. She challenged senior members, Thomas pressed forward, exposed hypocrisy, voice sharp and leveraged modern tools like social media to connect directly with political urgency, believing that institutions should generations of wisdom, not the other way around. Met his gaze as she entered the Supreme Court, knowing that the silence marble hall complicity, solemn portraits, she leaned forward, and echoes of her voice precise and reminded her of the barriers she could not remain silent while the bench wielded its authority to attack those ensuring Henderson versus State of Georgia. She cited verified evidence of luxury gifts. It was a battleground for American democracy and potential conflicts questioning whether state laws disproportionately and deliberate minority voters, drawing a stark line between ethical obligation defending and the pillars of federalism and originalism. Tense and charged, viewing the Constitution as a framework lawyers that demanded respect above emotion or partisan urgency, and even the other justices exchanged glances. It was about real people losing the fundamental right to vote. In that moment, each statute became more than a legal full participation in democracy, a stage for accountability. Her mission not merely legal courage but transformed tradition into confrontations, proving that no authority against the unstoppable force of modern accountability when justice demanded to be heard. In the echoing chamber, every gaze, every whisper, every movement carried the weight of history, and both Thomas and Crockett understood that this confrontation would be remembered not just for the law argued, but for the collision between entrenched authority and the rising demand for justice and fairness. The chamber erupted. Whispers turned to audible gasps and murmurs of disbelief as Crockett's words reverberated against the marble walls, shattering the usual solemnity of the Supreme Court. Justice Thomas, visibly shaken, rose from his bench, his black robes billowing, his composure fracturing. Decades of commanding silence with a mere glance had been openly challenged before colleagues, lawyers, and the public. Court officers moved nervously, unsure how to respond, while Chief Justice Roberts attempted to restore order with a firm but strained call for calm. Yet the momentum had shifted. Crockett's presence and unwavering voice dominated the room. Methodically, she presented her accusations with precision, citing luxury gifts, real estate dealings, and potential conflicts of interest, each revelation striking like a hammer against judicial infallibility. Thomas pointed, trembling, trying to assert authority, but Crockett met his gaze steadily, radiating confidence. The public gallery, filled with law students, journalists, and citizens, responded with nods, applause, and expressions of awe, turning the courtroom into a symbolic battleground between the old guard defending tradition and a new generation demanding accountability. Tension peaked as Thomas called for her removal, but Crockett, composed, stepped forward with undeniable facts. "Justice Thomas," she declared, "you accuse me of disrespecting tradition, but the real tradition you uphold is one that silences women, minorities, and anyone who dares to challenge entrenched power." Pulling out her phone, she cited documented instances of luxury gifts, unreported travel, and her wife's involvement in political maneuvers, leaving no room for dismissal. Shock, awe, and quiet cheers rippled through the gallery, as even Thomas could not deny the force of her words. Crockett had done more than confront a justice. She had made a statement that accountability outweighs deference, that justice must be blind to titles, and that history would remember those who spoke truth, not those who silenced others, transforming the courtroom into a historic reckoning that would resonate far beyond the marble walls. As Crockett exited the Supreme Court chamber, chaos erupted. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, and microphones were thrust forward, while social media ignited instantly. Clips of her confrontation with Justice Thomas went viral across Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, accompanied by hashtags like #Crockett vs. Thomas, #Justice for Jasmine, and #DocherThomasExposed. On the courthouse steps, Crockett stood poised and unflinching, addressing the press with the same clarity and resolve she had shown in court, emphasizing that her actions were about accountability, not disrespect, and drawing a sharp distinction between ceremonial reverence for institutions and blind obedience that enables corruption. Back in Washington, reactions split sharply. Progressive Democrats hailed her as a fearless advocate forcing the nation to confront a long-standing ethical crisis, while conservative leaders condemned her as breaching decorum and politicizing the highest court. International media framed the moment as a symbol of democratic tension in America. Legal scholars debated its implications for judicial-legislative relations, and corporations and financial markets began responding with increased scrutiny. Months later, the reverberations continued. Ethics reform legislation gained traction, the Supreme Court faced unprecedented public attention, and Crockett's profile skyrocketed, transforming her into a national symbol of courage, integrity, and generational change. Culturally, she inspired young Americans, especially women and people of color, to see empowerment in challenging entrenched power, while educators and academics debated the balance between respect for institutions and confronting systemic failures. Ultimately, Crockett's actions left a profound legacy. She proved that in a democracy, speaking truth to power can outweigh protocol, reminding the nation that institutions exist to serve the people, not the other way around, and reshaping the narrative of American justice in the process.